Welcome to the Why Community-Based Poverty Reduction Makes Good Sense panel session. My name is Nadine Reynolds and I work with the Columbia Basin Rural Development Institute at Selkirk College. And as many of you may know, poverty is a significant concern across our country in rural and urban communities, and the rate of poverty being the highest in Canada among the world's wealthiest industrial nations. British Columbia is actually frequently cited as having one of the highest rates of poverty in our country, with about 13% of our population living in poverty. So poverty is one of the most significant challenges facing our communities today. We also see it as an opportunity in the sense that poverty reduction is the opportunity. And there are these are unprecedented approaches to community and economic development. So during this presentation, we're going to share some regional and community statistics related to poverty. So we're going to sort of set the context by sharing some of the data that tells the story of poverty in our region and in our communities. And then we're also going to focus on the game changers. So what are the strategies, what are those actions that communities can take to alleviate, reduce, and ultimately the goal is to eliminate poverty in our communities. So we have five wonderful people here. We're each going to take a bit of time, and then we'll have quite a bit of time for questions, as well as some work at your tables just thinking about actions that we might take at the community level. So our group here, we are part of the Columbia Basin Poverty Reduction Working Group. Can I see a show of hands of people who are not from the Columbia Basin? Okay. When I say Columbia Basin, can you put up your hand and put up your hand if yes, you know what that means, what that looks like on a map. Okay, pretty good. So the Columbia Basin is a region that we identify with here, mostly because we have a trust, the Columbia Basin Trust, that is organized around that geography. And this working group is in some ways a result of some of the leadership taken at the Columbia Basin, through the Columbia Basin Trust. So from Greater Trail here, we have Jan Morton, and Jan is the Executive Director of the Skills Center and is currently facilitating a process to develop a poverty reduction plan with key stakeholders in the Lower Columbia region. So that is Greater Trail area. She brings more than 40 years of experience in adult education, employment services, organizational leadership, and community economic development to this work and to our presentation today. Anna Purcell will speak about poverty and poverty reduction work right here in Nelson. Anna is a Nelson City Councillor, and she's also the coordinator of Nelson at its Best, which is a project aiming to better understand and address poverty in Nelson. We also have Carrie Wall. Carrie's, so the Cranbrook Social Planning Society has a poverty reduction roundtable, and Carrie is a community health facilitator with Interior Health, and she's been working closely with the Cranbrook Poverty Reduction Committee since its inception. So we have 5 different communities here. We also have Jill. Jill is from Revelstoke, just to the north of us, and she's the social development coordinator for the city of Revelstoke and has been implementing work on poverty reduction since 2011, including the development and implementation of a community-based strategy. Jill has participated and presented at several regional and national conferences related to poverty, and is also co-chairing the Tamarac's BC-wide poverty reduction community of practice. So each of these communities are in different stages of understanding poverty and developing and implementing various strategies and actions. So we're going to hear from each of them, telling us about their local context, concerns, and sharing some of the stories in how we can tackle the challenges of poverty. As I mentioned, the Columbia Basin Trust helped the working group come together. So this is a neat way of small rural communities working together to share knowledge, share resources on this shared issue, this issue that we all have. And the Rural Development Institute, the organization I work with, recently joined the working group to help with collating data and looking at indicators of poverty. So looking at those, what are those measures how do we understand poverty, and then how can we also use these measures over time to see if the work that we're doing is having an impact. So to start, I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you about some of the indicators of poverty that RDI has been researching. And this is part of our State of the Basin initiative. So we monitor and report on a large suite of economic, social, cultural, and environmental indicators of well-being. And we do this to help build an understanding of our region and to help inform decision-making by local government, by businesses, by organizations. So some of you may have seen our annual snapshot report, and this year we've also produced a longer report and a series of trends analyses. And we've done a whole trends analysis on poverty. So if you're interested in that, you can check out our website for those documents, because we heard throughout the region and through our advisory committees that this is a really significant concern for many of our communities. And one of the most important things for them to start off was, what do we know about poverty? So we wanted to first start with getting that baseline. What are some of the indicators of poverty? What do we know about our region? What are the measures that tell us how well and how vulnerable our residents are? We also wanted to measure progress on poverty reduction efforts. And to just generally, our mandate is to support communities by providing the information needed to inform their planning and their decision making. And we've also produced 3 knowledge briefs on the topic of poverty and poverty reduction. So if you're interested in some literature, they're sort of short briefs about this. So measuring poverty, poverty is a complex issue, right? And so measuring poverty is difficult. We know that poverty has impacts on the individual, the family, the community, and right across all sectors. And there's no official government definition of poverty. And there's no generally agreed upon, provincially supported set of indicators to measure poverty. So it's not a simple task, but there has been quite a bit of work done in this area, and RDI has been reviewing and analyzing a number of indicators of poverty, really working with the data that we have, that we can get access to. So I wanted to just share, to give you a bit of a sense of how we might go about measuring poverty, some of these indicators. And one of the main themes, as you might guess, is income. So we can look at the average income of individuals or families. We can look at source of income, employment and unemployment. But one of the more telling indicators that is often used in measuring poverty is called the low income measure. Who's heard of LIM? Okay, a few people. So this is a relative measure. It basically shows us those who are living below the poverty line. So in our region, when we look at the data, we have 10 communities, and these are actually all in the West Kootenay region. So this is in just this West Kootenay region, Nelson, Trail, Lower Columbia, Castlegar-Nakusp, New Denver. We have 10 communities in the West Kootenay that have above provincial average of people living below the poverty line. And this really hasn't changed in the last 5 years. When you look at the different family units, lone parent families are the worst off. So we know that up to 40% of these families are living in income poverty. And you can see that in the Central Kootenay that it's the highest. We can also look at other family categories. So through tax filer data that we have access to, we can look at seniors, couple families, and singles. And of course, as you may know, the impacts of low income on health and education has been studied extensively. People living with a low income have difficulty accessing safe and affordable housing, nutritious food, adequate childcare, transportation, and a lot of the other necessary goods and services to live a healthy life. So income is one, housing is another. So housing affordability is a really important measure, and it's a very hot topic in our region. I imagine it's a hot topic in a lot of other communities of people who are here today. And so it's commonly agreed that when more than 30% of a household's income is spent on shelter, the housing is unaffordable. So we get this data through the National Household Survey from Statistics Canada. And so the term is core housing need. So if you're spending 30% or more of your income on shelter, you are in core housing need. If you are spending 50% or more, you are in severe housing need. So for our region, and this is the whole Columbia Basin boundary, 17% of owners are in core housing need, and 36% of tenant households are in core housing need. We also have some communities where tenants in particular are spending 50 to 60% of their income on rent. So that is not affordable. This is 2011 data. We're anxiously awaiting the end of October for 2016 data. We also do look at vacancy rates, and that's another one I think that will come up here today, because some of the communities here have vacancy rates well below the balanced rate. Nelson is sitting at 0.7% vacancy. So not only are people paying astronomical rents, they can't find anywhere to live, and it's actually a really big deal, I think, in Nelson right now, and Revelstoke too. But the other third main theme is food security. So income security, housing security, and food security. Now we have limited data on this topic, but we do get access to data from the Hunger Count, which is done by Food Banks Canada. So we know that there are about 16 food banks in our region who served 5,000 unique individuals last year. Use has gone up by 7% just in the last year. When we look at who's using the food banks, 30% are children. 44% are women, 57% are single, 62% are renting. And so in looking at the regional scale, this is an example where these communities have dived a bit deeper into this data, because you can actually start working with your individual food banks. Not all food banks participate in the Hunger Count. It's done once a year. So one of the things we're encouraging is food banks to be collecting more and better data to be able to get a better sense of food security and insecurity in our communities. So these are just a few of the indicators. I just wanted to get you thinking about how we start to measure poverty. And again, our trends analysis has more details on a bunch of other indicators if you're interested. So that's a bit of the regional context, and now I want to pass it along here to Jan, who's going to tell us a bit about the work that's being done in the Lower Columbia.
Thanks so much, Nadine, and that was a good introduction, and I think provides us with a good framework of the kind of data that we're working with. And each of us, as we go along with our communities, we're going to be kind of telling stories of what it is we're doing in our communities around poverty reduction, and the dance between the knowledge of the data and then what we do with it. And I think certainly what we've experienced in the Lower Columbia region, which is really at the south end of this West Kootenay Valley, close to the US border, we found that, and I think it's typical of most communities, is it isn't a straight trajectory between saying one ought to have a poverty reduction plan and then the implementation of a plan. It is, in fact, a whole series of putting grants together, putting projects together, working your way towards a plan, and then working your way through various resources to implement that plan. So it's not a straightforward trajectory. So as we've indicated, or as Nadine has indicated, I am representing the Lower Columbia region. That is made up of 5 municipalities and 2 rural electoral areas, population of about 15 or 20,000 people, overgoverned for sure. My organization, a nonprofit society, the Greater Trail Community Skills Center, is the one that has taken the lead on poverty reduction planning in the community. And in many ways, we're well positioned to do that because we are the principal employment service provider in the region, which means that we often sit as a bridge point between economic development, where are you going to have the jobs, where is the activity, and social development at the other end with the social needs. And we're often kind of find ourselves in that bridge point. Now, in taking the lead on poverty reduction planning, it doesn't mean we're doing all the poverty reduction work. For many years, there have been many agencies doing many things. The issue is having an intentional kind of plan around it. No, I'm good. So the first sort of phase of that, our first opportunity to work towards a poverty reduction plan, was some funding that we secured from Status of Women Canada. It was a 3-year project to basically look at improving economic opportunity for women. And one of the things that I will say with, let's see, I'm moving too fast here. There we go. One of the things that I have to say about Status of Women Canada as a source of funding is there's one requirement that they have that I think is brilliant, is that they require you to do really good, solid baseline research before you start implementing activities. So we actually had to do a gender-based analysis of economic opportunity in our community. And we've got a good, solid report that gives us tremendous indicators that, frankly, even though we did that report back in 2012, 2013, we're still referring to it and pulling data out of it because it's good guidance for us. And basically, in terms of that baseline research, there was a document called the Gender-Based Analysis of Economic Opportunity. It's a lot of hard data taken from various statistical sources. We also did a calculation of the living wage for our community using standardized calculation processes. We ran focus groups, and then we also created a tool called Photo Voice, which was a 7-minute video with really compelling stories of women in poverty. I'm not sharing that with you today, but certainly if you wanted to go to our website, you could take a look at that, because it has an enormous way of speaking to the heart and really helped us as we started building stakeholder relations in the community around the message. So a few of the, I mean, there's a lot of data we pulled out, but a few of the pieces that really became the story as we talked to our community is, first of all, the recognition of the wage gap between men and women. Now, this is not going to be a surprise to you, but it's nonetheless seeing it starkly that if we look at women, or if we look at those that are earning $24,000 a year or less, what we find is that, or more, I should put it that way, that 75% of men in the community earn $24,000 a year or more, whereas fewer than 50% of women earn that amount. Then you move up to the 50,000 level, 43% of men in the community earn more than 50,000, whereas now we're suddenly dropping down to 16% of the women who earn that amount. So that just tells a story, and it's something that we need to pay attention to. We also looked at the whole issue of lone parent-led families, because you've indicated that that is a real link to poverty. And we're in a situation we recognize that for every lone parent family that is led by a man, there are 3 lone parent families that are led by women. You intersect that with the income levels of adult women in our community, and while it's not an absolute predictor of poverty, pretty good chance that a lone parent family led by a woman is in poverty. We also looked at a lot of where women are working, and again, this is not a surprise. There are a very large proportion of our women, 86% of women work in what would be considered traditional kinds of work in retail, social sector, those kinds of areas of work, often which are less secure and definitely lower income. So now we've only really got the balance of those, the 14% that are in some form of non-traditional work, usually higher paid. But we also found in some of the anecdotal or the qualitative research that we were doing is that while there would be women who would enter into non-traditional work, very often within about 2 years of entering that work, they leave it. And they may have good certification, but they leave it for various reasons. And often there's a mismatch between other aspects of their lives and the opportunity for those careers, which means often they're going back to lower income kind of work. So we put all of this together, all of this work together. And when I say we had an advisory committee, 16 people, half of whom were women living in poverty. The other half were representing various agencies working with families in poverty. And we, using an appreciative inquiry process, we actually worked on the development of a community plan, which ultimately came to be called the 2020 Vision for Women in Poverty in the Lower Columbia region. And that is still a plan on which we're working, even though the funding, of course, dried up 2015. But we recognized that as a project, there was only so much we could do. So really, we focused on a couple of areas. One was that sustainable, non-traditional work, trying to get more women into that kind of work, and then improving access to education. We recognized there were a whole lot of other components that would have impact on economic opportunity for women, but we just didn't have the resources to drive it, which I think speaks to the need for a comprehensive community poverty reduction plan. So you've got all partners working in different areas and really working together to a common plan. Now, in the two focus areas on which we worked, one was, as I said, improving economic opportunity or access to education. So one of those areas is we actually created a bursary called the Stepping Out Bursary, went to a variety of funding sources. We're now in a position that we're awarding about $6,000 a year. We're awarding about $6,000 a year in various bursaries, ranging $750 to $1,000 a person. Critical thing is that we're really focusing in on where the gaps are, and often where the gap is women who are working in poverty, the working poor, who are working minimum wage jobs. They have minimal access to any kind of employment supports or assistance to get out of the trap of that kind of employment. The other are women who are not wage earners in their households. And we're very flexible with that particular bursary in terms of what it can be spent on. We may find from another source we can get help with tuition, but they don't have childcare while they're attending whatever training or course they're taking. We let our bursary be used for whatever is needed. We have bought car insurance in order for them to get to the training. And the critical thing as well is the recipients, as they apply for this fund, they actually are required to work with our employment counselors, because we find many of these women are very isolated. And so by working with our employment counselors, they start to be linked with the resources in the community. And then really the bursary itself becomes cream on the top. So that really is a sustaining initiative, and we've had some wonderful support for it. The other one is that part of the whole project is we actually developed a supplementary plan related to getting women into non-traditional employment. We actually created a whole other plan for that, and have worked away on it in bits and pieces. That presented another opportunity when some more funding came out from Status of Women Canada to support another initiative called the Mining and Refining for Women. It was a project that we designed to develop a mentorship model, and we were to work with a local employer. And in our case, we had a tremendous opportunity with Teck Metals Limited, which is our biggest employer in the region. And we were actually able to develop a mentorship model program with them to support the retention and advancement of women in their workplace. Now, we know those women are not earning poverty wages, but if we can change cultural attitude towards work in that kind of operation, then we can start having an impact on the whole region and attitudes towards non-traditional work. And we had a tremendous partner in Teck Metals. I can't speak enough about the kind of support that they put into this particular project. Again, we were required to do baseline research. We did a very in-depth gender lens assessment of their workers and their various attitudes related to women and non-traditional work. Tremendously rich response and lots of data that is guiding the work that we have done. So over a 30-month period, we had 2 cohorts of women. They were matched up with mentors, and there were, I don't have time to go into a lot of the detail related to this particular project, but we taught mentors how to be mentors, had very rich mentorship relationships over a period of 9 months for each of the cohort groups. And then the women in the cohort groups were required to work on something called affinity projects. So it was a project that would actually make a kind of pay it forward difference for the environment. And the lasting impact of those affinity groups, and then we also had a sponsorship team that guided this particular project, the lasting impacts have been tremendous. With the affinity projects, everything from very significant changes in practice related to human resources and succession management, workplace networking, some work around childcare, maternity and paternity policies have changed, and there's a variety of other things that they worked on. Tech has also actually, we helped them develop a tactical plan. That's their terminology when they have a plan, and a diversity committee, which they are committed to. And so they are, even though, again, this project is done, they continue to have a diversity committee, and they are interested actually in expanding the model to other tech sites in BC and across the country. Then, I mean, we weren't required to actually track what difference it made for the women in terms of, you know, sheer numbers, but a few pieces that we picked up. It was a fascinating conversation we had one day with the sponsorship team, in which the head of HR said, well, you know, in 2013-14, 12.5% of our new hires, permanent new hires, were female. But then in 2015, that went up to 15.7. Then by 2016, it had gone up to 20%, and it's continuing to rise. So it's tangible data that tells us there's a difference. And there's also some gorgeous stories of some of the women who've moved up into some really significant positions of responsibility within the company. And so that's going to make a cultural change in the community, in the company, and ultimately in the community, because it tells a different story in the community to the girls as to what choices they can make as they move into adulthood. So great work that we've done, and we will continue to do around this with a gender lens approach to poverty reduction. But we also recognize that there are lots of people who felt left out by a planning process that was through a gender lens. And so in the work that we do with agencies and local government, we actually convened a meeting back in 2015 and said, do you want to take this further? Do you want to actually create a poverty reduction plan regardless of gender, like that fits for everybody? And we had, of the 16 agencies that were present at that particular meeting, full endorsement to proceed. Now, of course, you don't do that instantly. You now have to go after resources. And it took us a while to do that. That's not simple. It's not easy. And sometimes very discouraging. But it was really helpful to us in 2016 that we had an opportunity to apply for something called the CRRF student internship program that the Rural Development Institute administers. Tech Metals pays the bucks, and RDI administers this particular thing. So we had an opportunity to hire a student for a summer and actually draft an initial poverty reduction, actually a set of indicators. So really the set of indicators that you've talked about for the region, we were able to create it for the Lower Columbia region. This RDI helped us with a lot of content process for doing it. The student learned a lot, I think, in the process. And with RDI's help, we actually produced this report called Surviving, Not Thriving in the Lower Columbia region. And we took highlights from that particular report, went out and talked to local government, other organizations, told the story, said, look, there's lots of people in our community that are thriving, but there's far too many who are not. And let's be realistic. Let's pay attention to the people that aren't thriving in our community. And so, you know, we're seeking some political commitment around that. We also knew that we would be moving towards an intentional poverty reduction planning process, which is something that we actually moved up towards in May of this year. Again, using an appreciative inquiry approach, we brought together about 70 people and representing certainly agencies in the region, local government, business, and people who are living in poverty. And through a two-day process, a really dynamic two-day process, we created what is the framework of a poverty reduction plan and a series of strategies underlying that particular plan. I have spent then over the summer working with working groups emerging from this planning session that we had. And actually early this week, I sent out through the email to my advisory committee, my design team, the first draft of the report. I can't give it to you yet because obviously we need to vet it with them. But we will now have the framework of a plan which can then drive going forward. We will continue that data collection piece, constantly kind of looking at it and being mindful about what are the really key pieces of data that we need to look at, which will continue to drive our direction moving forward. Okay. So we'll move it on now to Nelson. Bravo.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, there was a slide on the action areas. We could talk about that when it comes to the questions.
I just need the clicker.
Yeah, okay. Those were the action areas. Really good. Okay.
Thank you. So the City of Nelson is rich in collaborative bodies working to address a number of issues in general and in particular the needs of our most vulnerable populations. We have a Street Culture Collaborative, we have a Nelson Committee on Homelessness, we have a Nelson Housing Committee, a standing committee of council, and we have SPAN, the Social Planning Action Network that brings together people from the social sector, the business sector, the police, and others to look at and guide policy around the social sector. And SPAN created something called Nelson at its Best as a committee, again, of individuals and organizations to specifically look at poverty in Nelson, understand the lay of the land, and work towards poverty reduction. So they've been researching and analyzing using Stats Canada info and other data to better understand how prevalent it is in our community and how federal and provincial policy is impacting well-being in communities like ours. Most poverty is invisible and only becomes apparent when it's reached a crisis, and Nelson at its Best hopes to raise awareness of poverty in our area and offer information that can help, again, guide policy around reduction. So here's our age distribution in Nelson. It's not that unusual. Like many communities, we see the baby boomers moving through and will wind up having fewer people in their working years supporting children and the aging population. Let's see, I think most of the tax filer data was from, I think a lot of our information was from 2011. But so in any case, we found that 19% of Nelson's tax filers file for $14,000 a year or less. That's about 2,480 people, and their dependents are considered low income by that very low income measure. So who are these poor people? We were surprised that seniors weren't at that very, very low income measure. If we increase that to about $25,000 a year, we capture more seniors, but at that very low income level, we see mostly working poor and children, and then others. So the category workers doesn't include working students, by the way, which are included in others, which also includes adult dependents, people on income assistance or employment insurance. So the low number, yeah, as I mentioned, the low number of seniors is reflective of the lowest pension earners are often in that under 25,000 K. So we see a very alarming degree of child poverty in our community and poverty in general. In fact, BC has the highest rate of child poverty in Canada, and Nelson's rate of child poverty is higher than the BC average. 1 in 5 children in Nelson live in poverty. So this table here is a result of a formula that was developed by the Canadian Centre of Policy Alternatives as a more realistic variation on Stats Canada's market basket approach to defining low income and living wage. So the items in blue are local or regional prices, and those in black are Stats Canada provincial and federal averages. For shelter, you should note that we used a 2-bedroom accommodation because there were no 3 or more bedroom rentals available to price. We have 0 vacancy right now in Nelson. And this includes, this number includes utilities, tenants insurance, and $33 for a no-frills landline. The other category, thank you. The other category is a Stats Canada calculation for things like haircuts, household items, dishes, linens, furniture, electronics, recreation, vacation, toys, school supplies, extracurricular activities like sports and music lessons, internet, cell service, gardening supplies, feminine hygiene products, whatever you want to put in there. Childcare, we included 1 child in full day care and 1 in before or after school care. The Stats Canada version of this market basket doesn't include childcare at all. And non-MSP health, for anyone who's not from the province of British Columbia, MSP is our medical services plan, our provincial health plan. So non-MSP costs include dental, prescription eyewear, those sorts of things. The 2 weeks pay, as most low-income people don't get paid sick days. This is an emergency amount to cover the cost of income due to parent illness or the need to stay home with a sick child, emergency car repairs, just contingencies, and parent education. So this includes 2 college-level courses per year to enable the family to better its employment prospects over time. And all of this adds up to an after-tax income of just about $66,000 needed to adequately support a family of 4 in Nelson so they don't slide into poverty. The average earnings of a family of 4 in Nelson is $49,000, or about $1,400 per month less than what we calculate is needed. And the Stats Canada low-income cutoff for a family of 4 is $28,000 at $537. Just imagine for a moment how you would support a family of 4 on that. And that is slightly more than what's needed for food, shelter, and MSP, and doesn't include anything else. So Nelson's living wage was last calculated in 2015. It was calculated to be $18.42 and needs to be redone. We need funding to pay for someone to do it. We know, one thing we do know about these numbers is that the cost of food and shelter has gone up. We do have 0 vacancy rate, and food has gone up. So that number is likely higher, but the living wage is very responsive to policy changes. And so ideally it would be calculated every year because it's so responsive. So, if we got rid of MSP premiums that people have to pay, if we implemented something like Quebec's daycare policy, that would go a long way to lowering the living wage to closer to $15, which is what our new provincial government is trying to get us to by 2021 in terms of minimum wage. So a small amount of federal funding, really small, a couple $100, came through for communities that have poverty reduction organizations and strategies in place. And in March of 2017, community conversations were held in Nelson to discuss the nature of poverty and the most important issues for tackling it and what that might look like. They were well attended, and Nelson at its best has done other community consultations in 2014 and 2015 as well. And they're a really important part of Nelson at its best efforts to address the economic trends that we're seeing increasingly apparent in our community and identify strategies to overcome them and to develop resilience. And to add Nelson's voice, I guess, to a growing number of others demanding effective responses to poverty from other levels of government. Why don't you guys get it together? Okay, so Gini coefficients are a measure of inequality, where perfect inequality is where one person has all the income or consumes everything and nobody else has anything. And perfect equality is where everybody has an equal degree of income or consumption. We see Denmark there doing pretty well, Canada a little bit more unequal than Denmark, US more unequal than Canada, Nelson above the American degree of income and wealth inequality below Chile there. And in a local context, the city of Roslyn, which is, I don't know, about an hour away from us, an alpine ski town, has significantly less inequality than Nelson does, even though it looks quite similar. Somebody who lives in Roslyn could come to Nelson, feel really at home, feel like they were in a slightly larger, version of the town that they live in. And it's a good reminder for people working on rural policy to understand that while many rural communities share a lot of challenges and opportunities, looks can be deceiving, and there can be quite different challenges in communities that are even relatively close to each other. So what's next? A couple of the projects Nelson at its Best has in the hopper are ongoing. One is called Voices of Lived Experience. We tend to have assumptions about people living in poverty, and they're often incorrect. So people who are living with a low income can be reluctant to share their struggles. It's embarrassing and can be traumatizing to go over it. So Nelson at its Best has hired a Nelson resident with lived experience to interview people, capture their stories, and hear more detail what their experiences are and what would actually help. He's getting some great information from people that's surprising. There's also an initiative to give some of these participants formal public speaking training so that they can go on to continue advocating for themselves and speak about their experience in a way that will help everybody else understand what the actual realities of living with a low income can be like. So that project wraps up in December. That's when the funding has carried it until. We'd love to keep it going if we can get more funding, but as of now, that's the schedule for that. And I guess one of we haven't reported out all the findings yet, but I can tell you that something that may surprise people is that, of course, more money always helps when you're living with a low income. One of the things that people find most helpful in their struggles is social currency, is having a network of people to call on, to have somebody give you a ride, look after your kids for a couple hours while you go to the doctor's office, whatever it is, that this human accompaniment and network of people who are helpful can make all the difference in the world for people who are feeling stuck. So another project that's underway is 2 events that I've been hired to organize. One is aimed at the business community to look at poverty reduction from an economic development perspective. So looking at living wages and other benefits that can offer, that people can offer their employees, and how that may work, what that looks like, how it's gone for other employers, and roles that other business communities from other communities have played in poverty reduction where they're from. So looking at that expertise and inspiring each other to, within our own sectors and realms, really, take the horse by the reins and feel empowered to make a change in our community. The other event is using the gifts of our amazing, vibrant arts community to express the stories of people's experience living in poverty in different mediums, dance, film, paint, and hopefully digital arts. And those events will most likely happen in November. That's what's happening so far.
No. Okay, thanks. I'm Carrie. I'm representing the Cranbrook Poverty Reduction Group. And my story is a little different. I'm not going to give a bunch of data like we've heard earlier, which was fantastic, but I'm just going to shed some light on some different aspects of the work. So as many folks here probably know, BC is the only province left in the country without a poverty reduction plan. Apparently the new government now is working on it. So for many years, our provincial Liberal government said that provincial strategies didn't work, and they also said we didn't need one. And then they kind of changed their tune a few years back, around 2011, 2012. They said, well, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for poverty. It looks different depending on where you are. So instead what we'll do is we'll help you with some community poverty reduction strategies, community by community. And they launched a pilot project in 7 different communities around the province and said, we'll help you out, start doing some poverty reduction work in those communities. And it was a partnership between the Ministry of Children and Family Development, because they're the largest provincial ministry. They've got, people working all over the province. And the other big partner was UBCM, the Union of BC Municipalities, because the communities around the province have been saying for years, we need to tackle poverty reduction. Can we please look at poverty reduction? Can we get a provincial plan? And so UBCM was on board to be a partner. And so these cities that were chosen to be pilot communities, what happened in Cranbrook was a little different. It's a bit of a top-down sort of thing, because the local government and of the time in 2012, and the mayor at that time spoke to UBCM and MCFD, and they said, yeah, well, Cranbrook will be a pilot community. That sounds really great. But we've had a really hard time gathering community momentum sort of ever since, in a way. It's really different than what's been going on in other communities. But I think it's, another really rich, interesting experience, and it's been so great to learn from this Columbia Basin network of my colleagues who are doing this work in other places. So what happened was we started as this MCFD project, and they injected a little bit of resource into us, basically with this half-time employee whose job was to help low-income families, so it was only families, to access resources that already exist, because the provincial government said, well, there's not really a poverty problem, it's just that people aren't accessing the resources that they could. And so we'll hold their hands to help get to the food bank or help them file their taxes, that kind of thing. But then, so we had this really strong person who worked for the MCFD, was working on our committee, got people together, myself from Interior Health, government representatives, a whole bunch of people from the nonprofit sector. People were like, okay, this is really great, let's tackle poverty in this community. But then, unfortunately, once she left the position, then it was vacant for a year. So that was one challenge. And then, of course, the local government elections happened in 2014. And the local government, the elected council who had said, yes, we're on board with this program, then the whole local government changed. Actually, everybody changed in Cranbrook. The whole thing flipped, the entire city council. And then the new council was not interested in taking on poverty reduction in any way. And then pretty much a year later, UBCM said to the MCFD, you know what, this isn't even working. Like, you're working in 7 communities, it's just a Band-Aid solution. We don't think you're doing what you said they were gonna do. So then they pulled out. So it's been really interesting. And there's been this core group of us in Cranbrook who's still nonetheless been persisting to raise awareness, try to get some things going, work with the interested stakeholders, and keep pushing the movement forward. The working together prosperity. Is that a good one? So some of the great things we did is we our little committee, our poverty reduction committee, we decided to come under the umbrella of the Cranbrook Social Planning Society, which was a group obviously doing social planning, concerned with social issues in the city. And we said, look, can we come with you? Can we merge? Can we be part of you? This will be more effective. And that was a really smart move. No longer, the city was really no longer our ally in a way. And so we allied ourselves with the Social Planning Committee. And so we continued to do awareness activities and, let me check my notes here. Right, actually I'm gonna talk about that in a bit. So finding capacity to keep the work moving forward, again, that was an issue. Just lack of resources, really, and people working, off the side of their desks. A lot of agencies involved were people who are already working with vulnerable populations in different capacities. I took on a big part of the role as an interior health, community health facilitator. I have a lot of flexibility about what I can do and what I want to be involved in. And personally, I for better or for worse, I have a history of poverty. I was actually homeless just last year for a whole month. Even though I'm a government worker, I got rent evicted from my long-term rental, and I had to stay in various friends' houses for a month, lived out of my car. Fortunately, it was different than the last time I was homeless because I had a government job, and if I needed to, I could have slept under my desk. There's a shower in the hospital where I work. So and I had a car even. when I was homeless before that, I had a 4-year-old son, and that was way back because he's 20 now. But, you know, we didn't have a car. We didn't have money. I mean, the situation is different. I've been on welfare. I've used the food bank. So I've got this whole sort of different lens that I bring to the work, which really helps me stay motivated and helps me motivate others. Yay. So one of the huge successes we had in Cranbrook, actually, and this was a lot to do with the early days of the initiative when the MCFD and the UBCM were still involved. Really lots thanks to the MCFD employee who was the family consultant. Cranbrook now has a free low-income bus pass program, and I hear that there's hardly any of these across the country. I know there's a, you know, yeah, so the two big levers that the data says that can help, and Nadine pointed to this, the two real big levers that can help with poverty reduction are housing and transportation. And so if you're on low income and you live in Cranbrook, and there's a whole process of having to prove you're low income, but you can go, it's a part of the city of Cranbrook's recreation access program, which a lot of communities have. You know, if you're low income, you can use the pool, you can get recreation passes for cheap or free. And so you can get these low income bus passes, and the system isn't perfect, but I think it's a real light of leadership. It shows that there's something innovative happening in Cranbrook, and it's a great model. We've been collecting data on the low-income bus program, and there's a report that will be coming out about it, hopefully in a little while. Yeah, I was going to say some other successes that, again, being part of this Columbia Basin Working Group. We the Cranbrook Social Planning Society is also a member of the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition, which helps us stay connected to the larger provincial movement. We did host one of those community consultations that Anna referred to with feedback to the federal government on their proposed poverty reduction strategy. We have been doing many awareness raising activities, and we've decided to focus on housing. The poverty reduction group has got this renewed sort of gusto for housing, and we're having a housing summit November 3rd, a whole day-long event that we're really excited about. There'll be a bunch of stakeholders. It's illegal actually in Cranbrook to have secondary suites in your house, and there's just even a bunch of zoning laws that need to be changed, bylaws, like some really simple stuff. We're going to bring developers into the room, and there's a bunch of people like, we just got to really start talking about housing and how to make this happen. So that's great. People may have heard this, the poverty is constructed by society, so as a society we can tear it down. It's interesting to me because poverty and inequality are words that actually just name a symptom. They don't actually point to the problem. And I heard recently on the Next System podcast that they called the problem capital bias. There was an author on the program just this week, and she said, what it is, we suffer from capital bias, which is similar to, say, you know, a gender bias or a racial bias. Society is set up in a way where we have a bias towards people who have money. And she mentioned that there's you know, we look at political democracy, and we're like, oh, we live in a democracy, we have political democracy. But she said it's beyond people's thinking, for the most part, this idea of economic democracy. Like, we just don't have economic democracy. We live in a society where this symptom of poverty is named, there's a huge bias against it, and we think that it's sort of natural. We completely are in denial of the fact that poverty has been constructed. Like, we made it, we can unmake it. And there's a real awareness that needs to shift around, where does poverty come from? What does it mean? What does this symptom point to? And what do we need to get rid of it? So I think collaboration is a big key, and I thank you for your time.
Wow, that was just fantastic. Thanks so much, Karen. All right, so I work for the city of Revelstoke, and actually, I'm gonna go back. So it's kind of unusual that I'm speaking to a room that you may not know what kind of conditions are in Revelstoke. So I'm just going to really briefly describe it to you. We're about halfway between Vancouver and Calgary. We're right on the Trans-Canada Highway. We're right in the middle of the heart of the Columbia Mountains, huge mountains around us. We're on the Columbia River. We have the borders of our town border on national parks. And so people have, for years and years and years, people have been coming to Revelstoke for heli skiing and cat skiing and ski touring, and lots of European visitors for the land-based activities in the summer. 10 years ago, Revelstoke Mountain Resort opened, which is now being heralded as some of the best lift service skiing in the world. So we have people from all over the world coming to our community, both in the summer and the winter. Very seasonal, we have seasonal fluctuations. So the end result of all that is that we are a resort municipality. So 5 years ago this June, we completed a poverty reduction strategy for Revelstoke and area. We did the strategy for a number of reasons. Our community has been going through huge changes. While the quality of life in our community is very, very high, we heard rumors of people leaving town because they couldn't afford to live there. So people, the affordability challenges of living in a resort community are very real. We needed to find out what was real, what was happening, and what wasn't. So the overall goals of the strategy were to understand what was going on in our community. And I think we are hearing a lot today about data, research, and getting those stats. Super important, because that can really do two things. It can give you baseline data to kind of measure your projects and impacts that you're trying to achieve. But it can also raise awareness of what's going on in your community and help you ultimately figure out what more you can be doing at the local level to improve the overall health and vitality of your community as a whole. So coming up with, I think I turned it off. So anyhow, coming up with locally relevant measurements of poverty was absolutely critical. We, in particular, we looked at these overarching kind of things. We looked at income security, housing security, and food security. So in 2012, we estimated that food costs in Revelstoke were at least 14% higher than provincial averages. And since then, the cost of food has continued to rise. We see dramatic seasonal fluctuations. It's unreal. The price of milk 1 week can be, like 25 cents more the next week. The winter season's coming. They jack it. Right now, today, I'm just going to rant briefly. Revelstoke, I filled up my car with gas yesterday in Revelstoke. It was 124.9. We're right on the Trans-Canada Highway. I drive 2 hours down to Nakusp this morning, and it's 119.9. Go figure. 5 cents higher than a more isolated community. But we're very isolated. The nearest town to the east is Golden, which is about 2 hours away. Nearest town south is Nakusp, 2 hours away. Nearest town east, big town east, is over an hour away. So it's like, and north, there's nothing. It's just mountains and parks and heli ski operations. So we are, even though we're on the Trans-Canada Highway, we're quite isolated. In the wintertime, we get highway closures that isolate us for days due to avalanche conditions. Anyhow, Revelstoke has the highest rental housing prices in all of the Kootenays, as well as compared to other communities of our size in British Columbia and the southern half of BC. We have well below 1% vacancy rate, and as of the 2011 census, 40% of renters and 19% of homeowners were in core housing need. Utility costs are very high. We don't have natural gas. Because gas line can't go through the mountains, so we have propane. And so without a doubt, we're facing a variety of housing-related issues. Affordable housing, employee housing, vacation rentals, etc., making it the highest social priority in our community. For us, the purposes of doing a living wage analysis has been to determine what the real cost of living is in our community. I love that you really went over what's in a living wage calculation. In 2012 in Revelstoke, our living wage calculation was $17.75 an hour. In 2015, it was $18.87 an hour. We just redid it again last year, and it went down 10 cents to $18.77 an hour. But it's still the fourth highest in all of BC of all the cities that did the recalculations in April of last year. Next to places like Vancouver, Victoria, and Clayoquot Sound, which is even more isolated, the Tofino area. But it was super interesting to find out that despite known cost of living increases, the decrease, 1887 down to 1877, was directly related to the new federal child tax credit. So that shows you how that tax credit put between $300 and $500 a month directly into the hands of them. So it shows you the impact of higher level policy. So we see the living wage analysis as valuable information that enables us to work together with the business community and other key stakeholders on economic strategies to increase the number of higher paying jobs in our community, and on social development strategies like affordable housing and food security, local food initiatives to decrease the cost of living. So it's this kind of combination effect. Last year, our living wage research project showed us that, of course, the lower wage jobs were mostly in the retail and hospitality sectors. So how can we as communities help these sectors and others like small business employ strategies to ensure that they share wealth with their employees? And last year, we had the CED forum on the economics, poverty reduction. We had a business panel. It was really great. And small business owners shared strategies. You know, we had a cafe that, you know, ensured that its employees ate. They did things like buy ski passes for their employees and just incentives, like if you can't afford to pay your employees $20 an hour, what can you do that'll help them out? So
I can change it.
Oh, that's great.
Ready?
Yeah, sure. The next one, thanks. So from the municipal perspective, in Revelstoke, our city council has endorsed the National Cities Reducing Poverty Charter. And if you're not familiar with Tamarack and Vibrant Communities Canada, I would really encourage you to check them out. They're an amazing national organization. City Council has supported maintaining and reworking our public transit system. Public transit for small rural communities is super expensive. You might think your ridership is low, but last year I conducted a transit rider kind of interview feedback process. And the seniors caught wind that I was doing this. I had so many calls and they're like, oh, they were afraid. They were full of fear that their public transit system was going to be cut because they absolutely depended on it. So it's a cost for cities and municipalities, but it's an important one. Our city's core program, like Carrie mentioned, provides a free recreation pass, annual pass to our aquatic center and arena facilities, as well as 50% off all city-run parks and rec programs. This is really an important social inclusion piece for lower income families. And City Council, bless their hearts, also approves my social development coordinator work plan, which includes taking the lead on poverty reduction. And we're very fortunate, I think, that the municipality in Revelstoke has seen the value of having a social planner, a social development coordinator, because really there is no one else. It's very challenging for communities to lead collaborative processes with no one to take the lead. So within the scope of my work plan, we developed the strategy. I provide staff support to our local poverty working group. We've done lots of advocacy and awareness raising, which is working, which is really our food bank donations just keep going up every year, which is really important. Yeah, this year last week we had our annual food drive, emergency food drive. They collected 13,000 pounds of food from a small town. It's pretty amazing. And as I said, we did the CED forum on understanding the economics of poverty reduction. And we've also taken the lead on like things like a 2-year financial literacy project, which created a plethora of resources and it's really great. And one of my favorite projects is we also developed a youth access fund. So this is a no barriers fund for youth to help them participate in sports, recreation, and cultural activities in our community. Things like dance lessons, guitar lessons, sports, and our youth liaison also helps families access kids' sport subsidies and stuff like that. But we've also stretched it a bit to include things like a haircut before a job interview, super important. And for the youth, sometimes dancing or playing hockey or doing something like that can mean the difference. Like it can be the game changer in their life. All right, next slide. So speaking of game changers, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the big picture, and we've all kind of touched on it here. But we know that addressing poverty in our community is directly linked to economic and community development. We're talking about rural revitalization. We see it as an incredible opportunity. Can you imagine? We figured out with our cost of living analysis that 32.4% in our people were in our community, people were either just meeting their basic needs or struggling to meet their basic needs. Can you imagine if that 32.4% actually had a disposable income and could participate in community life and could volunteer, and instead of having to work 2 jobs and barely holding on? We know that key stakeholders, so we know that poverty with the Gini coefficient and that income equality scale and the social determinants of health, we know that where poverty exists, it impacts everyone in your community, not just people living in poverty, it impacts us all. We know that key stakeholders from a variety of sectors need to be involved in order to set the wheels in motion for effective long-term change. Individual citizens can be champions and lend invaluable expertise, and I'd just like to thank Carrie for sharing your story with us, because that is where that meaningful drive comes from people in our communities. Local service providers and community organizations that directly work on the ground with people living in poverty have invaluable, rich knowledge and firsthand experience to share. Local businesses are directly impacted by poverty and need to be involved in creating and implementing solutions. And local government has a very important role to play by providing leadership, building partnerships, taking the lead on strategic planning. And for things like affordable housing, setting in place a consistent and innovative regulatory environment that will maintain existing and promote the development of new housing stock. I cannot stress this enough. We have to, as municipalities, we have to bite the bullet and create those really solid inclusionary zoning and amenity contribution policies and bylaws, because then you can work together with the private development community to build community. It's not us and them, it's you're working together to build community. Next slide. So poverty has been called one of the most complex issues of our time. Working on poverty reduction is strongly linked to the concept of building shared prosperity, strengthening resiliency to outside forces that may be beyond our control. The Revelstoke of our the role of the Revelstoke Social Development Committee is to work in partnership with others to tackle those gaps that other community groups and organizations simply do not have the time or mandate to cover, and to draw resources into our community, not only for the benefit of our social sector, but for everybody. And at the bottom of all this, really, is the overall health and strength of our own small piece of society. We cannot have a vibrant economy and strong community capacity if our citizens do not have resilient individual capacity. So that's what this is all about here. The work we're doing does not replace invaluable frontline work, nor does it displace the role and responsibility of higher echelons of government. The fact is that we are living in an increasingly complex society, and we need to be creative and innovative, and we have to have leadership and strong community partnerships in order to move forward. And that's why together we can do it.